Have you ever looked at someone else's life and wondered, why does it seem like everyone else is moving forward except me? Maybe you've prayed about it. Thank you for watching my channel today. Today's topic is stop trying to escape your season, because it's something we all have been guilty of doing once in our lives. And our seasons are here for a purpose. So let's unpack this. Have you ever looked at someone else's life and wondered, why does it seem like everyone else is moving forward except me? Maybe you've prayed about it. Maybe you've worked harder. Maybe you've read books about it or taken courses on how you can progress your life. You listen to the podcast. You've done everything you know to do. And yet, you still feel like you're standing still. And trust me when I say I understand that feeling, because I lived it too. And for years, I thought my greatest problem was that I was in the wrong place. I thought that if I can just get to the next opportunity, the next promotion, the next business milestone, or what about the next chapter in my life? And then everything in my life will finally come together. But what I didn't realize was that I wasn't fighting my circumstances. I was fighting my season I was in. And that's the exhausting part, because no matter how hard we try, we cannot rush what God has the authority to change. You know, as someone who spent years working in horticulture and studying creation, I watched something fascinating, because I've never seen a tree become frustrated because it wasn't spring yet. And I never seen a flower refuse to bloom because it wanted to skip winter. And I've never seen a harvest appear before its appointed time, because creation doesn't compete with the season. Creation cooperates with it. But we, yes, us, we often spend our lives trying to escape the very season God is preparing us for. Because there have been seasons in my own life where I wanted answers immediately. I wanted doors to open immediately. I wanted everything I've been working for and towards to finally happen. And if I'm really honest with you guys, sometimes I found myself praying more for God to change my circumstances than I was praying for Him to change me. And looking back now, I realized something. Some of the greatest growth that happened in my life happened when everything was finally working. It didn't happen while I was waiting. I was preparing while I couldn't yet see what God was doing beneath the surface. And it isn't that exactly what happens in the garden that has built and framed me, but it's when you looked at the soil in this wintertime, it doesn't look productive. It doesn't look exciting. You don't see the flowers. You don't see the fruit. You don't see any harvest. But beneath that soil, God is still working. The gardener, God doesn't panic because nothing is visible. The gardener understands that what cannot be seen is just often as important as what eventually will be seen. And maybe that's where you are today. Maybe nothing around you looks like it's changing. Maybe you started questioning your purpose. Maybe you've been wondering if God has forgotten all about you. Maybe you even started comparing yourself to a timeline of everyone else's. But if that's you, I want you to stay with me, because this week, while I was reading scripture, I came across one sentence that completely changed how I think about seasons. And not seasons in nature, seasons of our lives. And I believe if you see it the way Daniel saw it, it might change the way you see your life too. So let's look at Daniel and see exactly what he actually says. Not what we think he said, not what we heard someone else say he said. Let's look at the scripture. So in Daniel chapter 2, that takes place during the most stressful moments in Daniel's life because King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. He demands that his wise men not only interpret the dream, but tell him what the dream was actually about. And when they couldn't do so, he orders for every wise man in Babylon to be executed. And that included Daniel and his 3 friends. So think about that for a moment. Daniel isn't reading this story from a place of comfort. He's standing at death's door. And his future isn't uncertain. It is uncertain, and it's hanging in on the balance. So what does Daniel do? He doesn't panic. He doesn't manipulate the situation. He doesn't run and hide. All he asks for is time. He used that time and gathered his friends, and together they sought out God's mercy. I love that because before Daniel looked for an answer, he looked to God. God and God alone. And then something incredible happens. God reveals that dream, the mystery. Not because Daniel was the smartest man in Babylon, not because he earned to know what the dream was about, but because God chose to reveal it. And Daniel's response tells us everything we need to know because he doesn't praise himself. He doesn't celebrate his own wisdom. He immediately begins to praising God. Let's listen to what he says. He says, "Praise be to the name of God forever and ever, and his wisdom and power are his." Then he says something that honestly stopped me in my tracks. Daniel says he changes the times and seasons. Just let that settle for a moment. He, not me, not you, not the culture, not social media, not our plans, not our deadlines. He changes times and seasons. That means the authority to change seasons belongs to God. And I don't know about you, but that convicted me. Because how much of my life I spent trying to hurry a season that God hadn't finished using in my life. Have you ever prayed, God, just get me out of this? God, when is this going to end? God, why am I still here? I've prayed those prayers. But Daniel reminded me of something, and that is if God is the one who changes seasons, then maybe my responsibility isn't to force on the next season. Maybe my responsibility is to faithfully do in the season I'm in. And that changed everything for me. Because suddenly, winter was no longer my punishment of stagnation. Spring wasn't about pressure, planning new things. And summer wasn't about performance, things emerging. And fall wasn't a finish line trying to get a harvest. They all became places God was accomplishing something different in my life. And isn't that exactly what we see creation does? Because winter never apologizes when it's resting. And spring never rushes to become summer again. And summer doesn't skip work just because it wants a harvest. And fall, it doesn't cling on to fruit forever. It releases it. So every season has become a season of trust in the one who created it. And creation doesn't resist God's timing. It responds to it. And that's the invitation I believe Daniel gives us. So we not simply just admiring God's control over the seasons, but to trust him within our own seasons. And when I began developing the 4 seasons of alignment, I wasn't trying to create some kind of clever framework. I was trying to understand something God had already placed in creation. So why do we struggle so much within the rhythms that already begins and understand like the tree does? Why do we think we always have to be producing? Why do we feel guilty when we are resting? Why do we compare our spring to somebody else's fall? Daniel reminded me that the answer is here. He changes times and seasons. And if God changes them, then I don't have to force them. I simply need to be faithful until he does. And I wonder what would happen if we stop asking, God, get me out of this season, and start asking, God, what are you teaching me in this season? Because I have a feeling that one question could change everything in your life. If any of you watching this episode do enjoy a good audio book or like to listen to podcasts on your commute or driving, walking, exercising, I do indeed have a podcast. Right now it's on Spotify. We are expanding it for our iPhone users. For now, you do not need a subscription or a premium account in order to listen on Spotify. I would drop the link in the descriptions so you can indeed link on and meet me at the podcast. I do a deeper dive than what I discuss here on YouTube and social media platforms. And more importantly, any platform you find me on is to teach and show how we can align with God's rhythm and flow and flourish as creation does. So again, I hope to see you guys on Spotify for now and tune in to my podcast. So if Daniel teaches us and tell us something incredible, that God changes times and seasons, the next question is, why are seasons so important to God? And to answer that, we must go all the way back to the beginning, because seasons didn't begin with Daniel nor in our lives. They began with God. And when you open the book of Genesis, you discover that creation was not random. It was very intentional. Everything had order. Everything had purpose. Everything had timing. Everything that God did, he didn't create everything at one time. He created in sequence. He created with rhythm. He created with intention. And when he created the earth, he designed it to function through seasons, and not just weather seasons, through rhythms and cycles and preparation and growth and harvest and rest. Doesn't that sound like the 4 seasons? That was his design from the very beginning. And then something happened, that sin entered the world, that generations had passed on. And then a flood came, and then everything changed. Can you imagine what Earth must have looked like after the flood? The landscape had to have changed. Civilizations were gone, and humanity was beginning all over again. And if there was ever a moment when God's created order had been abandoned, it was then, after the flood. But listen to what God says after Noah leaves the ark. In Genesis chapter 8:22, God says, as long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer, winter, day and night shall not cease. Think about that. After the flood, God didn't replace the rhythm he already created at creation. He reaffirmed it. He didn't say from now on everything will happen when people want it to happen. He didn't remove the seasons. He preserved them. Preserve what he created at creation, because the rhythm was never the problem. The rhythm was always the gift. Always the gift. And that verse has become so meaningful to me, because it reminds me that even after one of the greatest judgments recorded in Scripture, God still chose his consistency. He still chose his order. He still chose his seasons and seed time and harvest. Not harvest, then seed time. No, winter, then spring. Preparation, then growth. Growth, then harvest. The pattern remained. Why? Because God knew that everything healthy grows through seasons. And creation understands this. The forest understands this. The field understands this. Our gardens understands this. And yet, we often resist the very pattern creation quietly follows. It doesn't plan on harvest, growth without waiting, influence without preparation, fruit without roots. God's creation tells us a different story. His creation reminds us that every season has a purpose, and every season prepares for the next, and no season lasts forever. And that's the hope. So if you're in winter, spring is coming. And if you're planning new ideas in spring, your growth is coming in summer. And if you're faithfully tending to that, summer will show a flourish. And harvest is coming. And when harvest comes in fall, another season will begin. And not because we decided for it to begin, but because, as Daniel has reminded us, he changes times and seasons. So maybe the question isn't, how do I get out of this season? Maybe the better question is, how do I flourish while God has me here in this season? Because I believe that's where real peace begins. Because that's where I believe where real growth begins, and the opportunity for us to flourish with God's creation and flow occurs. So what does all of this mean for you and for me? If God established seasons, if God preserved those seasons after the flood, if Daniel reminds us that God alone changes times and seasons, then maybe we've been asking the wrong question. And instead of asking, how do I get out of this season? Maybe we should start asking, how do I flourish while I'm here? Because that's what creation does. Creation doesn't resist the seasons as they emerge. They respond to it. Think about a tree. In the wintertime, a tree isn't dead. It may look dead. It doesn't look like it did in fall. It looks different. Growth is happening where you can't see it. And its energy is being conserved. The roots are still alive. And preparation is taking place beneath the surface. And then spring arrives. Now it's time to begin again. It starts with the small buds appearing, and then new growth begins. Little leaves start leafing out. Nothing is fully mature, but life is moving along. Then summer comes. This is the season of consistency. The tree isn't trying to become another tree. It is simply doing what healthy trees does, and that is receiving, growing, strengthening, and deepening its roots. And eventually, fall will arrive, and the fruit will appear, and the harvest comes, and it produces seeds from that. And what was cultivated begins blessing something beyond itself. Do you notice something? The tree never competes with its season it's in. It simply responds faithfully to it. Now compare that to how many of us live. We're in a season. We're asking God for rest, to give us a rest from it. But we feel guilty because someone else is producing. We're in a season of planting those ideas and visions, but we're frustrated because we don't have the harvest yet. We're in the season of strengthening our roots, but we're comparing ourselves to someone else's fruit because their harvest already arrived. And no wonder we're exhausted. We're trying to live someone else's season instead of faithfully stewarding our own. Or we'll have all 4 seasons trying to be accomplished in one time. And I know what that feels like because there have been times in my own life I thought success meant moving faster, doing more, creating more, building more, always producing. But God has been teaching me something through creation, and that is that every healthy garden has seasons that look productive, some seasons that look real quiet, but yet both are necessary. And if the garden skipped winter, spring would suffer. And if it skipped spring, summer would be so weak those plants couldn't survive. And if it skipped summer, there would be no fall harvest. So every season depends on the one before it. And maybe that's true for us as well. Maybe the season you've been wanting to escape is necessary in order to prepare you for the very one you've been praying for. And that's why I created the 4 seasons of alignment. And not because I wanted to give people another personality test, not because I wanted another framework to introduce, but because I wanted to help people stop fighting that same rhythm that God has already placed throughout creation. So when someone takes that 4 seasons of alignment assessment, they're not telling them who they are. We're helping them recognize where they are because you understand your season. When you do, you will stop measuring yourself against everyone else's timeline. You'll stop feeling guilty if your life doesn't look like someone else's. And you'll stop trying to force fruit that's not ready for harvest. Instead, you'll begin asking questions like, Lord, what are you cultivating in me right now? And that's a very different prayer. It's a prayer that opens your hands instead of tightening your grip. It's a prayer that invites trust instead of control. Like God said, Moses, what's in your hand? It's a prayer that says, God, I believe what you're ready. You'll change the season I'm in when I'm ready. And until then, I'll be faithful where you have planted me. So if you've been carrying the weight of feeling behind, if you've been comparing your life to someone else's you may know or have seen, if you've been wondering why your harvest hasn't come yet, I want to leave you with one final thought, because it completely changed the way I look at my own life. And I pray that it changes for yours too. So let me ask you one question. What season have you been trying to escape? Maybe you've been trying to escape a season of waiting. I've been guilty of that. A season of healing. Me too. A season of preparation. I'm guilty. A season of rebuilding. Me too. A season where it feels like everyone else is moving forward while yours have been somehow put on pause. If that's where you are, I want you to remember 2 verses. The first verse is from Genesis. And let's remember, God said, as long as the earth endures seed time and harvest and cold and winter and day and night, it shall not cease. God established the rhythm. He preserved the rhythm. And he promised that rhythm will continue as long as the earth endures. And then Daniel reminds us, God, changes the times and the seasons. Do you see the beauty of those two scriptures together? Genesis tells us the rhythms continue, and Daniel tells us who is in control of it. So that means you don't have to carry the burden of changing your season. God never asks you to. He asks you to trust him. He asks you to walk with him. He asks you to be faithful. And when the time is right, he will change the season. And I've learned something through the years of working in gardens, because the healthiest gardens never rush the process. And the gardener doesn't stand over a seed every morning demanding that it grows faster. The gardeners prepare the soil, plant the seed, water it faithfully, and protect it. And trust the growth will come at a proper time. So maybe that's exactly what God is asking of us. Not to force the growth, not to compare our timeline, and do not panic because we don't see fruit yet, but to the faithfully tend what he has already placed in our hands. That's really what We Are Gardens is all about. Tending to what he placed in our hands. Is not about becoming a gardener or gardening. It's about recognizing through scripture God uses creation to teach us how to live. And if creation can trust God's timing, maybe we can too. So I invite you to take our 4 Seasons of Alignment assessment if today's message resonated with you. If you found yourself thinking, that's exactly where I am, I'd love to invite you to take our assessment. It will help guide you and let you know what season you are in. It is designed to help you recognize the season you're currently experiencing and begin learning how to flourish within it. And not by rushing you to the next season, but by faithfully stewarding the one you're in today. You can find the assessment at www.gloriadcassell.com. And if this message encouraged you, would you do me a favor? Can you please share it with someone who's been feeling discouraged? Someone who's been wondering if they're falling behind. And someone who simply needs a reminder that God's timing is still good, still on time, right on time, because you never know whose hope may be restored through one simple conversation. So I'll leave you with this. Don't measure your life by someone else's harvest. Measure it by your own faithfulness. Because the God who established the seasons is the same God who changes them. And until then, don't spend your life trying to escape your season like Daniel. He didn't escape, and we are not to either. Learn how to flourish in it. I am Gloria D. Cassell, and remember, we are gardens. From the earth, the soil, tend to you. I'll see you in the next video.